This is the last known photo of me as a healthy young man. And as you can see, young I was 8 years old. Shortly after this photo was taken, I was diagnosed with both Crohn's disease and arthritis, two autoimmune conditions. So Crohn's disease affects the gut, arthritis affects the joints. Lots of different symptoms, but they basically boil down to chronic pain and fatigue. Now, this young man never thought of himself as having a disability. And in fact, growing up, I never even thought that these conditions would even affect me when I was, old enough to work. So, very ambitious kid as I was good at writing, so I decided that I wanted to be a journalist. And I went to journalism school and I graduated, and I ran smack dab into what I'll call organizational culture. Because this was 1990, and newsrooms at the time were run by the same people who ran them back in the 70s and the 60s. So for anybody who knows the character of J. Jonah Jameson from the Spider-Man universe, that was news bosses everywhere. They were almost all men. They wore stress as a badge of honor. They constantly yelled and they screamed, and they wanted those pictures of Spider-Man on their desk by noon, no excuses. And if you did provide excuses, they would berate you in front of all of your peers. Now, in that culture, in that environment, do you think I felt comfortable talking about my invisible disability? Absolutely not. No way. There's no way I would be able to do that. So here's what happened. After a couple of years, I got tired of the stress. I loved the job, and I realized the stress was predominantly man-made. The stress was a culture. And I thought, I don't want this. And it wasn't good for my health. So I left television for a couple of years. Then a friend of mine started working at a new network that just opened up and said, hey, Jason, you should check this place out. It's a little bit different. So I did. I went there, and it was a different sort of culture. It wasn't a culture of stress like all the other newsrooms that I'd been in. And the one thing I loved most was my boss. My boss was a very supportive guy, and that's something I desperately needed because in the first 6 months that I started work, I was off work a fair bit because I was going through a flare. And when I was coming into work, I was coming in a lot of pain. And I think he appreciated that. So he actually really supported me. Not only did he not fire me, but he also considered me for promotions. And I started getting promoted for the first time in my career. And a few years later, they actually asked me to be the head of all news for the entire network across the country, which was a huge job and a big responsibility. And I said no. And the reason I said no was, I don't want to be J. Jonah Jameson. I don't want to be pounding the desk, screaming at people. Stress is not my friend. I can't do this job the way other people do it. And my boss was great. He said, Jason, we don't want you to do this job the way other people do it. He goes, we have goals that we want you to hit, but how you do it is up to you and your team. We want you to be you. And I thought, well, how can I say no to that? So I said yes. And then within about 2 weeks, I immediately regretted it. Oh, man. And the reason I regretted it had actually nothing to do with my illness. The reason I regretted it was once I get in the job and saw all the charts and everything else, I realized that for the past 2 years, both the quality and the quantity of the work that was being done by our journalists had been steadily going downwards to the point where all of the senior managers were kind of panicking. And guess what? This was my job to fix now. I had no idea how to do it. I didn't know the cause of it. No one did. But there was one thing that I did know how to do, and that was communicate about my illness and my invisible disability. So we had a big meeting. We got everybody in from across the country. I introduced myself as a new boss, and I said, hey, something that you should probably know, I have these two conditions. These are some of the challenges. I may have to leave work early. I may be gone 2 or 3 days in the hospital or at home. This is how we'll work around them. Very matter-of-fact, open, honest, solution-focused. And this is where the magic happened. In fact, the thing that I thought was going to hold me back from being a good manager, which is my invisible disability, kind of ended up being my superpower, at least in terms of communication. Because I was open and honest and solution-focused with them. Guess what happened? They started doing the same with me. And within a couple of weeks, I had half of my staff at some point come into my office and let me know about their invisible disability. For some people, it was learning disability or learning difference. For other people, it was a mental health issue. For other people, it was a physical issue. half of my staff. And I realized this is where the problem was. And nobody knew about it because none of these people came forward. But now that they came forward, looked at each person in turn and asked, how can I support you? And in a lot of cases, it wasn't a big thing. We didn't have to spend a lot of money. Sometimes we just made small changes to the way they did their work to allow them to go to doctor's appointments, all that sort of thing. But it made huge results. And within a year, we'd more than doubled our productivity. And we started winning national and international journalism awards for the first time in the organization's history. And the reason I tell you this is not through any sense of ego, but to show you that people with invisible disabilities can achieve big milestones if they're supported, even just a little bit, and understood. The other message I want to send to you is the power that one person can have in an entire organization if they understand invisible disability and support these people. And I'm not talking about me. I'm not the hero in this story. The real hero in this story is my boss. I was just doing what was natural to me. But my boss was the one that took a chance on the guy with the invisible disability. He was the one who put me in a position of leadership where I could help others.